I'm going to talk about organizational grant readiness. Several years ago when the Hub had their first summit and they asked communities what they needed to be successful, they said two things. They needed grant writers and they needed match. They were lying. They were not ready for grant writers and they were not ready for match. We hear lots of excuses in Kansas of why we don't compete with other states. We're too small, we're too rural, the cards are stacked against us. The reality is there is not a pipeline of projects ready to be submitted for grant applications, and the vast majority of organizations across Kansas are not grant ready. And those are two critical things that need to be addressed so that Kansas can truly be a player in federal funding and get our share, not only a fair share of the BIL, but of Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS, and everything else that's coming down the pike. So when we talk about an organization being ready to apply for and receive grants, we're talking about very basic things. We're talking about policies and procedures, who has signature authority, internal controls, separation of duties, all of these things that seem not even an issue for us or the organizations, the communities we support. But the vast majority of Kansas towns, we're talking about one part-time employee who's the city clerk, who's also doing X, Y, and Z. And these jurisdictions, Matt talked earlier about the ARPA, State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, they're having trouble managing formulaic dollars. This is money where literally the Department of Treasury said, this is the money, this is the number you're getting, here's an award letter, sign it, here's a civil rights assurance, sign it, and you can now use it essentially for whatever you want. And they're struggling with that. Imagine what they're doing, navigating, the different sectors, going through discretionary competitive applications, that sort of thing. We've heard so many unfortunate stories where the original person who received the ARPA funding passed away, moved away from the community, is no longer associated, and they don't know where the money is. They don't know if it was spent. They don't know if it was deposited in the account. All of these are indicators that these communities are not actually grant ready and are certainly not prepared to go after these larger discretionary competitive grants. So we as a grants community really need to do our best to work with them, not just when they call us and they say we have a project need, we have an idea, but building that grant readiness ahead of time. Why is it important? Develop quality applications. You're all talking about the tips and tricks and how they put together a quality application. The phone calls we're getting at the Hub are, I have an idea. I might do it on one of 4 pieces of property. I might have 3 different options. And we don't know if we're going to be able to get the approval from the state. But help us write a grant application. I mean, these are real stories. That does not lend itself to putting together a quality grant application, no matter how hard we try as grant consultants. Navigate risk reviews. As part of most federal grant application process, they're going to do some sort of risk review of your organization. Have you managed federal funding before? Do you have policies and procedures? Do you have internal controls? We have communities across Kansas that have put together wonderful applications, but can't navigate the risk review, can't navigate the back and forth with the funder, and are ultimately discredited from getting funding. Once they receive the grant, it needs to be successful. The worst thing you can do as a grantee is fail on a grant that you have been received. That stays with you reputationally. And it stays with you reputationally not only with that one particular federal funder, but they share information across the other funders. So if you get a grant, you need to make sure it's successful. You need to make sure that the project outcomes are what everybody's looking for. And with the new uniform guidance revisions, there's a big focus on evidence-based intervention and outcome. Federal agencies are looking for projects that can be repeated over and over again. They don't want projects that are so specific to a single jurisdiction that they could never be applied, that best practice can never be applied to any other community. They're looking for replicable solutions with their applications. And finally, what you're all trying to do, whether it's pre-award or post-award, is build the trust of a funder. You want to be the grantee of choice. And I know that sounds funny, but it's a real thing. At the end of a fiscal year, whether it be state agencies, federal agencies, foundations, there's usually money that's come back into the coffers that they quickly have to allocate somewhere. They're not calling that jurisdiction that is not grant ready, that never submits their reports on time, that they've had to walk them through every single step. They're calling that grantee that's nailed it every single time they've given them grant funds. And that's what we ultimately want to set these communities up for, is that kind of relationship with funders. I was a municipal grants administrator in Arizona. I was a non-entitlement community for community development block grant. I was not a very good grant writer, but I knew how to do the post-award. At the end of the fiscal year, the county, whenever they were looking to reallocate funding, they called me and they gave the money to my little community, not because of anything I ever put down in a grant application, but they knew I was going to take care of the money post-award. So as you're looking with jurisdictions, these are the types of things you want to look at. If they can't do it internally, have they partnered with a consultant? Are they 2 CFR 200 compliant? That's easier said than done, obviously, with the new uniform guidance revisions. Even things like, who's going to submit reports, who's going to sign the application, who's going to sign the award, all of these things need to be checked. The other thing that's going on right now is we have a whole generation of grant professionals who have only done grants in the COVID era. The only grants they have ever touched are CARES Act coronavirus relief funds and ARPA state and local fiscal recovery funds. The only grants they have ever touched have limited applicability to the uniform guidance. Davis-Bacon hasn't applied, NEPA hasn't applied, domestic preference, American Iron and Steel, none of those have applied. And now as we come out from COVID, not only does that generation of grant professionals, but also the leadership within those communities need to be educated on what capacity needs to look like for their community to be grant ready. You have to be able to enforce Davis-Bacon. You have to be able to comply with not just American Iron and Steel or domestic preferences. You now have to be able to comply with BABA. And to make matters worse, and I'm glad I could provide all this happy news on the end of the day, to make matters worse, not only has the uniform guidance been changed, there have been updates to NEPA, updates to Davis-Bacon, and we're all trying to figure out what BABA is because we're used to domestic preference and American Iron and Steel. So even those of us that worked on federal grants pre-COVID, a lot of the things we're used to doing has changed. At the same time, the federal agencies are trying to help. They're trying to negotiate this. They're applying for waivers where they can. But that continues to muddy the waters because one agency has a waiver of BABA, the other agency doesn't. One program has a waiver, the other one doesn't. And you can imagine what that means for these local communities. So we really need to invest in grants readiness. One of the things we can do, and Christy asked a question about sample procurement policies. None of this stuff is new. None of this stuff is one-off. We really need to be working with our clients, working with our communities, and sharing with them the stuff, all the stuff they need. They need grant policies and procedures. They need subrecipient versus vendor determination. They need duplication of benefits. All of this stuff is stuff we all have. We all have in our collateral, our library. And we really need to be sharing that, getting it out there so that we can get to the important part, which is identifying the right project, aligning it to the right funding opportunity, maturing those projects, and getting them positioned for grant readiness. So one of the things I'm a big advocate of is using ARPA dollars, as was mentioned, to take care of this. There was, I forget who I had a conversation with from Nebraska, and one of the things that these communities can be doing right now, and we can be encouraging these communities right now, is to use their ARPA dollars, their state and local fiscal, admin dollars, indirect cost recovery dollars, increasing public sector capacity dollars, revenue loss, provision of government service dollars, is to invest in their grants enterprise and also invest in these projects to move these projects along, do the pre-environmental, the pre-engineering, all of that work that needs to be done to get these projects to a point where they then are ready for submitting grant applications to the feds. Grant readiness is not something that you do one time. We saw, a decade ago with the housing crisis, we had a very similar pot of funding with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act money. The jurisdictions, the organizations at that time who took some of their ARA dollars and invested in grants capacity and maintained that grants capacity were much better positioned to take advantage of the COVID funding and also take advantage of the BIL, IRA, and CHIPS funding. If you look at federal funding, and for those of you that have been involved in federal grants for 20 years or more, it's a 6 to 8 year cycle where we see historic amounts of federal funding, whether that be because of the Crime Act, housing crisis, hurricanes, pandemics, you name it, but we're on kind of a 6 to 8 year cycle. So it's really important that not only when we work with these communities to help them build grants capacity, we help them maintain that grants capacity and reinvest in that grants capacity over time. Because otherwise what we're doing is we're building them up, funding dries up, they shut everything down, and then they're flat-footed the next time there's a funding opportunity that comes along. So with that, I will get off my soapbox, and I hope I have not depressed everybody, and I'm not sure I have any answers other than it just needs to be a constant conversation that we're having with communities as we work with them. Are you grant ready? If not, how can we address those items? And if you have an organization that's never going to get to grant readiness, how do we find a fiduciary agent, somebody to be that fiscal agent on their behalf, whether it be a regional planning commission, whether it be a state agency, whether it be the county serving the city. But if you don't start with a strong foundation, you don't start with an organization that's grant ready, project readiness, grant application, everything going forward is not going to be successful.
All right, thank you. Questions? ARPA dollars can be used to pay for consultants?
ARPA dollars can be used to pay for consultants.
Okay, all right, you heard it. So let your clients know about that. One thing you brought up there about the identify staff professional development needs, spark something, a memory. We've been talking about in-kind match. And we've actually put some good examples up on our website recently about the use of in-kind match and what qualifies as in-kind match. This is something that a lot of our communities sort of forget about when they're applying for grants and applying to Bill Kansas Fund for that matter, that their time and effort managing and administering the grant after award is worth something, and they need to account for that. All right, questions? Lisa, you're all wired up, right?
Oh my gosh, I don't, whatever, yeah, like, can we be best friends? You said all the things that I, yeah. And I saw your face when it was, when in-kind came out, and I saw a grant administrator's face. In-kind match is hard. It's hard to administer. So you want to make sure you have systems in place to really understand the allocation of funding and how that is specific to the project, because it is project cost. It's just that the project cost is being borne in a very different way, but it has to be the project. And yeah, in-kind from an administration perspective is a challenge, but it also is a great opportunity to leverage what we already do as part of our job to get the federal aid.
There's in-kind match that's hard, and then there's in-kind match that's not hard.
Yeah.
And when I talk about, everybody needs the same stuff, we're talking about a sign-in sheet for a public meeting where the public can sign in and the amount of time, and that's easy in-kind match. Harder is, contribution of equipment and different things. But, you hear communities talk about, we don't have any matching dollars, we don't have any financial resources. And it's like, well, you had 3 town meetings to talk about the water plant. That there's a value to that if you just have the basic things in place to capture it and document it.
Yeah, and I will say that we recently got some worksheets. FEMA had some worksheets related to in-kind match, which actually help communities do the calculations of the value of the dump truck and the laborer and the electrician and the time and effort, things like that too. So if anybody wants those, we can get those to them as well. Question over here?
If you were going to give, say, 3 resources for communities who are looking to manage grants after they've won them, what would those 3 resources be to get them started in building the structure they need to be grant ready?
I would give them subrecipient versus vendor determination. It all starts with the relationship type of third-party entities you're going to work with. So many people skip that step, and it just has a compounding, effect going forward. A procurement policy if they don't have one, because oftentimes they, are so used to working with the same vendors, working with the same organizations, and sometimes they get tripped, right out of the gate. And the third one is to sit them down to actually read the award document they've received and the program guidance that goes with it. Because 90% of what they need to know is spelled out in their award document when it talks about your progress reports have to be submitted on this date, your financial reports have to be submitted on that date. And people look at the first page, they sign their name to it, and they're off to the races, and they miss all the important things that are right there in front of them in the award document. When we talk about the ARPA dollars, so the state and local fiscal, we talk about the state and local fiscal recovery fund, money went to the state, went to all 105 counties, 10 major metros, and all the non-entitlement units across the state of Kansas. They had to sign 2 pieces of paper. One was the award document to accept the dollars. The other one was a Title VI civil rights assurance. They all signed a Title VI civil rights assurance, not knowing what they just signed their community up to. I would venture to guess that of the 105 counties, 80 plus are out of compliance with the Title VI civil rights assurance. And of the non-entitlement units, hundreds are out of compliance. And that was a piece of paper handed to them, put in front of them, and they never even read it, signed their name. And so those are the 3 things. And they seem really stupid, but if you can't get started right, if you can't get out of the gate right, everything else is downhill from there.